My side, ready to start. Give me a thumbs up if everyone's ready. We have quite a few things to show today. And Pilar, if you're good to record, let us know. Whenever you're ready, we can record. And I don't know if you guys met Pilar yet. She's our newest joiner at GraphOps, together with Bura. Okay, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Okay. And I'm ready to start. Are we recording? Awesome. Okay, so welcome everyone at the latest LOH, so 27th of September 2023. We have had quite a few updates since last meeting, which was 2 weeks ago. So in terms of agenda, today we're going to cover Launchpad development since the last LOH, so something we've been doing every session. Then we're going to do a demo of overriding, so the chart version, so you can now override any namespace chart version, any namespace URL, chart URL. So if you want to use an external chart or your own chart, you can do that. And then we've also added scaling interfaces. So in one namespace, you can deploy multiple replicas of a chart. And we'll see how that works in practice. Then following up from last week's session, we're going to continue talking about release channels and deploying custom versions. And yeah, we're going to review that and we're going to show you the latest docs. And then we're going to do an open discussion. Please ask any questions at any point. Welcome, Xerxes. Sorry if I got that wrong. Please do ask any questions at any point. And yeah, we're glad to see more people come. Yeah. All right. Okay. So in terms of Launchpad Starter, we haven't really had many updates on that side. But on Launchpad Charts, we have added, so graph node, we have added a graph indexing status overview dashboard, and I can show it in a minute. We have released multiple versions of pretty much all of our charts, so Oregon, Nethermind, Arbitrum, Lighthouse, and so on, as per the dependency updates. So as new applications of each one of these charts get released, our charts automatically push a new release as well. And you'll see that when we talk about release channels. And we have also added on Launchpad charts, on all of our Launchpad charts, topology-aware routing functionality, which I'll cover in a minute. In terms of Launchpad namespaces, as I said, we have added scaling interface to all namespaces, but right now it only works on Ethereum, and we will have it fully implemented for all namespaces by the end of the week. And we have also added the ability to override a chart version and a chart URL. And on the documentation side, we have added an additional release automation and workflows guide. So starting with topology-aware routing. So what this means is that, say you have a Kubernetes cluster that spans across multiple zones and multiple regions for the purpose of trying to make the traffic go faster and save costs in terms of queries. We have added topology-aware routing. So what this means is that if pod A makes a request to service X, the service X will try to route those requests to the pods running on nodes in the same zone rather than running on a node in a different zone. So the service should prefer the endpoints in the same zone. And the way we did this in charts is by, so let's pick Aragon because that's our favorite. Okay, here you go. Okay, so the way you are doing this is by adding this option for users to add topology-aware routing enabled. It's disabled by default. And what this does is add additional, like this additional annotation that, service Kubernetes IO topology-aware hands, and that enables the functionality. And then on the user side, there'll be other affinities and other features to be added to make this work, but the charts now enable all of this. If you do have questions about this, please do let us know, but this is so people can make use of their infrastructure in the best way. All right, the other thing I said I was going to show was the graph indexing status data. So if I go in our cluster, so this is our running cluster, going on monitoring to port forward into Grafana. This is port forwarding, so I'm gonna start host 3000. Now we have the graph indexing status overview, and you can pick your data source, and you can see here block ingestion rate. You can see the networks is running, the indexing status with subgraphs IDs, and whether you have any post subgraphs, any errors, and subgraph health. So this is added in our graph node chart by default now. Okay.
As a small update, that release of the graph node chart doesn't just add the dashboard. It also adds support for auto-provisioning Grafana data sources based on your database sharding configuration. So if you define multiple stores in the chart configuration, there's a primary store which is defined by default. But if you go ahead and add other shards, it will auto provision those in Grafana, so that it's easy to visualize data from those sources.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Moving on, the next thing I was going to quickly talk about before we go to the demo. So last week we've added this layers of packaging to remind everyone how the different layers relate to each other. So if we start from the highest level, so your Helm file.yaml, the one that lives in your own repo that is a copy from Launchpad Starter, that declares all Helm releases, and they're imported from Launchpad namespaces or other Helm files, and that instantiates a Launchpad namespace. So importing Helm releases and Helm files from Launchpad namespaces. The Launchpad namespace itself provides values interface to override charts, chartVersion, and chart values for all the predefined releases. And it also packages Helm releases. Helm releases are a deployment of a Helm chart with a given set of configuration. A Helm chart is the official name of a chart. All of our Helm charts live in Launchpad charts as a reminder. The Helm chart provides values interfaces to override the chart configuration, and that includes container images and deployment options, resource sizing, and so on. And in itself, a Helm chart packages Kubernetes resources. So those are your deployments, your stateful set, your persistent volumes, and so on. And those Kubernetes resources orchestrate usually a container. So a container that instantiates a container image, and the container image is usually what refers to the binary of your application. And thank you, Chris, for creating this, because it does help to explain the whole process. But hopefully this helps people, and if it does, we will make sure to add it into our docs. Okay. Now, in terms of the release automation, so over the last few weeks, there have been questions around how do we keep up with the latest releases? And sometimes maybe GraphOps won't move as fast in terms of making something, marking something as stable, and some users will want to deploy it straight away as soon as a new binary is released. And one of the comments was, do we need to one of the comments was, do we need to create our own Launchpad chart to follow the latest releases? And the answer to that is you can, but you don't need to. And hopefully this diagram will explain why. So if we take the example of Erigon again, and we see that Erigon itself has pushed a new release, then we have a bot, so Renovate, that detects that there is a new release, and it pushes an update branch and opens a release PR. So a new PR is opened on Launchpad charts. And here is where a user, so an operator, would verify that Canary release is working properly and add that commit to the PR to set it as a new stable release version. But before we get here, the bot, as soon as the PR has been created, there's a workflow that runs and updates, runs and creates a new Canary chart. So if our latest version was Erigon 1.10, then as soon as Renovate detects that a new release has been deployed, it would create an Erigon 1.11 Canary 1. That 1.11 Canary 1 is what the operator would test here. And once they test it, they would merge it into main. Now, now we have a different bot that runs on Launchpad namespaces, and that would push also an update branch and open a release PR. And here the bot would auto-merge that PR to create a new canary tag. So because Erigon is related to the Ethereum namespace, an Ethereum canary tag would be created or updated on Launchpad namespaces. Sorry, just following the chat as well. Once the operator has run once the operator has tested and merged the PR into Launchpad charts, a new workflow runs on main branch, and that pushes the new stable draft chart release. So that becomes Erigon 111 on Launchpad charts. And again, another bot runs on Launchpad namespaces, which does the same thing as before, which is push an update branch and open a release PR, and also auto-merge the PR to create a tag. There's additional testing, but this is overall how it works. And yes, we can actually check right now if the new Erigon release that Matthew is mentioning in the comments for Holsky has been picked up by our Launchpad charts. So I'll do that right now. Let's see. If it hasn't run, the reason why it wouldn't have run straight away is because right now our bot runs every 2 hours. So if it hasn't, yeah, it's not there yet. So it would run within the next 2 hours. But yeah, the point is that we shouldn't, a canary release for Erigon would be created within the next 2 hours. All right, similarly to this diagram, we have also added a guide, which is on our production docs, that explains in more detail how how all of this works. And so you have the same diagram, and then you also have the breakdown of the steps divided into the automated flows that happens on Launchpad charts, Launchpad namespaces, and the manual operator steps that need to be taken in order for a release to make it into stable into an Ethereum namespace. And to do that, we would internally deploy those releases onto onto our production infrastructure. All right. Please do check this out. Let us know if you have any comments. This guide also contains a few details on how to update the chart version and chartUrl. I will pause here for any comments or questions. I do want to say, Matthew, we do have plans to make the renovate the bot run faster as well. Yes, you can run the container version in the Helm chart, but we've also added it as part of the namespaces interface. All right, pause for questions. Okay, if there are no questions or additions, I will show a demo of the scaling interface, chartVersion, overwriting a chartVersion, and overriding chartUrl. So for that, I have a repo that's basically a clone of Launchpad Starter. I have copied the sample helm file.yaml into helm file.yaml. And here I have updated the default Ethereum girly example. So the one that is here. So I have customized this a bit. So some things to bear in mind is that I'm deciding to run it against a different namespace. So instead of the default, if I don't specify this, would be to create the releases associated with this namespace into itgirly namespace. I'm overwriting that to be itgirly demo. And then overwriting some of the values. So passing a JWT, storage class name, and so on. These are not new things. We have gone through some of this before. But the thing that's important here for scaling interface is that under values, I am saying, please give me 2 deployments of each one of the releases in Ethereum. So that would be 2 Aragon deployments and 2 Nimbus, 2 Aragon releases and 2 Nimbus releases. And I'm also giving it a P2P, so peer-to-peer start port, which automatically enables using peer-to-peer ports. If you don't specify this, it wouldn't enable peer-to-peers. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. And I'm just going to apply that. So task, releases, apply, it curly demo is our namespace. And yes, I want to apply. So again, 2 Aragon releases, 2 Nimbus releases, and 1 proxy D because we don't want to scale proxy D. Each one of the, so in response to the question, yeah, each one of the releases would have their own, so persistent volumes and therefore data directories. Okay, so looking into the cluster, you can see that this is coming up. So it's curly demo. So you can look at the logs. You can see that the node is starting. And similarly on stateful node Aragon 2, individual of each other, so they're not related to each other. They are starting, they're syncing. We have the same with Nimbus, and only 1 proxy D. Okay. Any questions so far in relation to this? Yes, thank you, Carlos. So similarly to how we say here Aragon, you can add Aragon 1 values that are completely different to Aragon 2 values. You might want one of them to have a smaller size, smaller volume size, or whatever other, or run with different options, or even run with different arguments and so on. And I think I can show that on Launchpad namespaces. So if I go to Ethereum values, so how does everyone know how to connect to Nimbus? Let's have a look. It's not here. It would be into the curly namespace. It's the other way around. Yeah, so Nimbus connects to Aragon and it's pre-computing. So we're telling Nimbus 1 to connect to Aragon 1 and Nimbus 2 to connect to Aragon 2. All right. Moving on to the chart version override. So let's say we want to run Aragon with a different version. So right now, you can see here, Aragon runs with chartVersion 0.82. Yeah, let's do that, you're right. 0.84 Canary 1. Okay. Did I save? Saved. Okay, you can see here in the diff that the Helm chart version is 0.84, and as part of that 0.841 Canary 1, it updates to the newest application version of Aragon. So if we run this, hopefully it doesn't break the new Aragon, but this is fine because this is for testing. But yeah, if there would be anything broken, it'd be between the versions of 249.2 and 249.3. Okay. So if we look at, so you can see that both Aragon 1 RPC daemon and stateful node 0 are now 49 seconds old and 50 and 44 seconds old, which means that they have been updated, and we can look at the logs. And they seem to have started and no errors. And same here. Let's see if it started and syncing. Right. And the same with the other two pods, so Aragon 2 as well. In contrast, Nimbus, which we haven't touched, is 6 minutes old, and the same with Proxy D, 6 minutes old. All right, looking at the logs again, Matthew is asking if the deployment is smart enough to tell you if you start 2 Aragons, but to tell you if you start 2 Aragons, I'm assuming to also start two versions of Nimbus. And the answer is, and thank you, Carlos, for that, will always be the same because they're computed with the scaling index option that is in Launchpad namespaces. And And I can see that Carlos is typing, but I think in the case of Polygon, we don't have a namespace for that at the moment. So you can set this up at the namespace level. While Carlos is typing, I will continue with overriding. Okay, so with overriding a chart URL, so this is giving users the ability to, at namespace level, instead of say use GraphOps chart, you say I actually want to use a completely different chart. And here we just gave it a completely different link of like Aragon pointing at Avalanche, which in practice is not correct, but just to show that this what this would mean. So, and I'm gonna comment this because this won't work. Okay, there is no Avalanche version 0.84 Canary 1, but if I run this, and I do expect it to break because Aragon and Avalanche, the configuration will be a mismatch. But before I run this, I want to show you home file list. Okay, so it curly demo Aragon. So it curly demo Aragon is currently pointing at GraphOps Aragon, and when I apply the changes with overwriting chartUrl, okay. Okay. If I look at helm files list, you can see that I didn't. Probably need to run helm file cache cleanup. Okay, it's not quite picking this one up. I haven't saved it. That is a rookie mistake. Okay. Okay, there we go. So in the diff, you can see here that basically is changing all of the resources because we're pointing at a completely different chart. And you can see here that Aragon is moving to Avalanche, and if I do this, then we'll see it in helm file list as pointing to the new chart we've overridden. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do this where you point, I don't know, Erigon to an Avalanche chart, but you might be able to find external charts run by different organizations, or if you wanted to create your own and maintain your own chart version, you would be able to still use Launchpad namespaces interface, but with your own chart. Okay, so you can see here that now Erigon is running with Avalanche. Okay, quickly going through some of the comments. So Vince is saying, would it be recommended to change from Canary to latest when it's made its way to latest for sanity checks? And Chris is saying, we run 2 pools of nodes for each blockchain, one that runs latest Canary and one that runs latest stable. And yeah, we give them a bit of time to make sure that they are working properly, and we run a few checks as well in between. And Matthew is asking, can you tell ProxyD what percentage of traffic you're sending to which namespace, or scale the percentages over a few hours to make sure that your canary isn't stable? And the answer to that is that each pool has its own ProxyD instance as a load balancing endpoint. But yes, we being able to wrap those in another endpoint and still traffic would be cool. And then also Carlos is mentioning that in addition to running an external point, you can external chart here, external link to a chart publicly from a public repository. You can also do some. You can also point to a local chart. So, for example, in my case, I'm in new infra. So if I did Launchpad charts, and then chart, like basically locally hosted chart. Okay, that is all I had to show today. So now we are in outcomes and actions, or open discussion, or more questions. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and let everyone discuss openly.
Matthew, on sharding, the graph node chart already supports sharding. It accepts a store object in its input configuration, and you can define as many shards as you want. And you can also use the chart to define subgraph placement rules. That it obviously just relies on the underlying config.toml. But yeah, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to shard using the Launchpad stack. Um, at least the way that the kind of rest of the stack works is that we use Postgres operator to declare Postgres deployments. And so obviously if you wanted to use sharding, you'd need to declare a few more deployments and, have, placement rules that make sense for those instances, but then you could configure those using the chart pretty easily.
So just to clarify here, Chris, when you said updated more deployments, you meant creating more Postgres databases as exemplified here.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
That's right.
And just a question for ourselves internally, would we want to update namespaces to create number of instances that is passed by the user?
No, I think number of instances there is for replication. So obviously in production you might want to configure replication for a given shard, but that's a different parameter.
Okay. Well, we can create like a few, like a mini guide of the things you need for more sharding.
Yeah.
Like how, yeah.
Pretty much you would just need to deploy more of the resource that we're looking at right now. And then if you go to Launchpad charts and open up the graph node chart,
Yeah, any values, right? The config.
yeah,
That's what you're looking
exactly.
for.
So you'll see that by default, there is a primary store that is defined. If you go up a bit, on line 207. And the PostgreSQL connection string is then defined on 212. And if you scroll up and find the secret env section, the authentication credentials for all of the shards that you define, you just inject as environment variables and then interpolate into the connection strings in the store configuration below.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it might be super easy to just put a guide together to explain some of this if people think it's needed. Okay. All right, do we have any more questions or comments or anything? Or are we just enjoying the sweet silence? We will see you guys in the next 2 weeks, and please keep the questions coming on Kubernetes Launchpad channel.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.